Parenting Desire, a podcast series on how to circumvent desire rivaling by Nicholas Sakellariou. Episode 4, Naming Serenity Before Even Acknowledging Thunder. Missing a step prevents from extolling fraternity. What if desire, previously interpreted sensationally to indicate a passion contradicting an insight, parochially made sense no more? What if sense-making, proximately regarded an instrument bringing physical reference to those in search for insight confirming belief, brought a remark no less? By God, as a result of both remarking an outcome of search and interpreting longing in favor of seeing with one's eyes, comes a sense of having guilt for feeling passionate. Contriving to learn beyond blaming crave for what it dictates, you justify a canon in approaching belief like praise of the senses. I am talking about belief to describe an approach to certainty with reference to indulging whatever desire. In addition, the priority indicated by believing is exactly what desire rivaling will show. No one sound may feel prioritizing where there is someone confusing a desire as directing attention to places where learning is about what one can read. In exaggerating desire intolerance, behavioral moderation lessens impulse personal blaming to whoever attends satisfaction about body seduction. In theory, prioritizing sensational abstinence bypasses enduring confusion. In practice, undoing the temporary esoteric intolerance is setting the perpetual tribute to exchange parochial literature with evidence observing. Welcome to the fourth iteration of the Parenting Desire Sequence podcast. As you constantly separate self-praise from senselessly extrapolating ideas, you start leveling up previous resentment from absorbing self-blame. This was my upbringing condition of conducting an ordinance applied to fostering compassion by means experimental. Feeling impatience to abrupt the rhythm, the rolling stone, composed as you train along the instructions given with former correspondence, is putting you under, rather than expediting serenity, impedes recovery from infatuation. I henceforth entitled parenting an examination of individual duty, invariably celebrating own preference. Personal inability to match desire with self-interest thus negates autonomy in designating fealty. For instance, making plans without composure, instigating difficulty to bypass impossibility of having particular ends secured. By consuming continuously theories supportive of limiting pleasure, all who exclaim fealty opposes passion mismatch serenity to mean absence of ego. Reversing that mismatch completely depends on proving resonating an idea, praise of desire, for which many have expressed limiting evaluation. Having laid out an approach to promote courage based on accepting desire unapologetically, this podcast proceeds to talk about excitement produced suddenly at the heart, endearment, and frustration. What is more, in support of my correspondents who have found themselves either sad or irritated due to compressing a fire reaction on numerous occasions, a justification for resisting no more is required. Acknowledging immediately the discomfort felt to the core inside the combustion alley preserved for achieving chemical function to a person's lungs is the prerequisite before reducing agony and impatience. Drawing the distinction between showing affiliation towards an idea that creates self-control and having a fire indicating self-appreciation has been the signature message delivered all along. Besides, lingering onto the pressing idea or postponing personal efforts to let it become anything but compromising certainly imprisons anybody that believes without seeing. In the middle of sequencing those efforts described in my previous episodes, the rolling stone and the placement of ideas of infatuation upon a center where fear by no means depresses an individual, improving seems to be neither ongoing nor matter of fact. My self-authoring method, instead of promoting reduction of individual strength, augments constantly one's ability to prioritize everything they concur resonating with anything they praised carefully. Before affirming the matter for which you sequence your effort as confident in this approach, trying to bolster heartfelt appreciation for doing not the contrary of your taste, comes exhibiting day after day proof of ameliorating self-confidence which parenting desire provides. Leveling up in theory, meaning forcing upon yourself an escape from immediate pleasure through abandoning praise of esteem, as opposed to naming readiness by demand, ensues retaliation, the self-contradicting imposter travesty whose evidence is discussed thoroughly hereafter. Naming serenity before even acknowledging thunder refers to such travesty detected so plenty as severing prose in praise of desire. I forbid this from my repertoire a priori, given my idea that extrasensual deliberations bring paramount value to someone versus physical satisfaction, which does not. None of the distinctions made by intolerant to self-indulgence experimentation attendants of my podcast is causing a blurring as stalling than the hypotheses of pleasure corrupting your serenity. What follows is two scenarios in recognition of which I provoke any listener who insists telling themselves they defy being tolerant of passionate behavior. The provocation consists of laying out the consequences of tailoring individual attitude to avoid celebrating fervor despite the person suffering, assuming they have served themselves. I will be concluding proximately that leveling yourself up, showing sympathy for others' parochial titles as transcending or bona fide, is impossible to proceed unless an individual is trying to even out their inferiority testimony for a role unreasonably embarrassing them. Whether you insist on saying you know passion derives from prevailing not under periods of impulse generation, you have been confusing someone's pulsating priority with separating longing from feeling capacitated. That is the reason I emphasized to my listeners in the previous episode the role of such exercise promoting mnemonic recall, by which anybody who still proposes exuberance belongs to a different from their constitution phenomenon makes an original discovery. Therefore, a posteriori validating fervor does not distinguish between ephemeral and everlasting times. One self-expelling, fervor-condescending scenario whose parts create distortion, with plenty reference literature begetting blame to attributes contrasting serenity, has its participants thinking an individual does prevail around passion every time by serving all without intentionally addressing esteem may disappear. To undo, therefore, excitement restraint, damaging so whoever lives knowing reluctance, but also describes passion as weakness, what this discussion will offer to the rest of the episodes consists of evidence separating anybody from affinities essentially basic. I am, as your host, letting nobody perform, in my name at least, personal care before acknowledging verily that the one who tries to avoid opening a difficult for them conversation seemingly expects to amend behavioral misunderstanding, whereas naming the fact of the matter supersedes talk. My invitees, then, that consider servitude to be their serenity transition regard self-training the opposite of committing to juxtaposing who they long to be with who they argue they find themselves catering towards. In the first scenario about severing somebody's heart longing and fealty apart, the symptoms of reduced adrenaline generated by their blood which affect the leg conditioning can be seen in two ways: collapsing posture as well as constant lethargy. A very dramatic scene taking place with a protagonist who suffers from serious emotional disillusionment will give you an impression of the travesty by which asserting servitude a priori prevents someone from raising their care for anything. I now order this short correspondence featuring a tolerant of self-praise discussant and another expressing a similarly diminutive position, the number of bravery lost in translation. The reason being my method centers on savoring a passion as opposed to lamenting excitement for what stimulus undertakes, blaming so whichever decision passes above the pardoned theoretical limit. Issuing words that expel fervor in support of tranquility can by no means touch someone, provided experience contradicting the lost desire fulfillment supposedly brings, the protagonist said. Bravery, he continued, is the product of long-held exuberance, not any type of control. My service is a piece of generous, sympathetic concentration upon a person, not anything offered before I treat individual care, he suggested. The contestation from their discussant, a parochially mindful service affiliate who thinks controlling somebody's passion begets them sense of resilience, betrays sentimental constraints not permitting them undue enjoyment strictness. Exerting control over your composure issues the tension of habit to live with joy in your priority. Furthermore, if you repeatedly lend yourself to compete a private indulgence, calling attention to presumably precarious for the orientation stimulus, longing ceases to stress you out as the basic sensual prerogative starts to empty. Besides, he went on, are not all those transcending their crave block capable to tell who suffers from abandonment of self-control? A considerate pause, taken from this scene's light-hearted crave believer, came in between assertions, providing him, as a result, clarity to further claim. Joyful recognition of having a desire cannot be honestly obtained unless the recipient confides in verification presented to them as stealth, electrifying magnetism. What I, scientifically speaking, mean by a person procuring magnetism as an indication of longing can be readily documented every occasion you feel jeopardy. Once something surprises someone, what happens to their physical stance does afford the same reaction, with their desire stimulating its kinetic indictment to the body. Suddenly, the protagonist of this scene looked at a mirror which decorated the wall behind them in appreciation to the fact they stood full of capacity. Here, in front of me, is the skeptic whose echo of non-endearing sentiments towards craved satisfaction has led the confrontation between a personal longing and control. He was not at all discrediting his discussant as he told him this. To my skeptical friend, in case it is coming across as if I'm using theatrical wording plenty in this exchange, what I'm constantly doing is telling whoever disputes passionate attitude with themselves they invalidate theories of sacrifice. Scientifically elaborated, my hypothesis about why infatuation lingers is that individual crave produces a shake in the body. The absence of it has been provoked by distorting one's nervous capacity to create equilibrium in their hormonal system. Having practiced the methodology which teaches how to progressively restore loss of tolerance for endorphin reaction in the spine, one has set the basis for pacing brain-composed agony kinetically through sound, even by auxiliary and movement combinations. Rhetorically speaking, he then mentioned, restoring confidence in oneself can be said to require admitting you desire ferociously, by which, instead of pronouncing moderation, a person is removing from their narration repertoire every stage of non-indulgence imaginably so possible. In comparing all dimensions that bring aptitude to enacting indulgence, I have no evidence to convince me that serving somebody else has a place in supporting courageous attitude. Nothing proves that in escaping from personal satisfaction, a celibate will transcend to serenity. Remove then priority formation from the many stories that cause myopic view of personhood. In order for anything profound that you discover, you also see being permanent. Before you advance as a self-care expert to regard whatever appetite that may be as signal which guides you, it is fundamental you transition from condoning self-blame. Infatuations persist when whichever theory advocating control, a story condescending the thunder emanating self gets accepted, he added, leaving a long pause indulging the silence. Crave control followed by servitude defeating ego are the two ideas having produced distortion when it comes to deciding upon self-care, he affectionately told his companion. He then continued softly to state his affirmative recognition of servitude. I do not see the valor in consuming ideas which have condescending implications, hence I held that by claiming control over passions, it is a theorist who has abided by conditions nobody surrounding them praised. Servitude I justify as follows. Not changing your attitude in order to abide by immediate reaction does satisfy confidence. That sounds implausible in the beginning, but after you depart from any conflict due to consuming reactions that originate elsewhere, any offering you prepare makes sense. For that same experiential reason, he added, I do not say to you do that which arousal has signed. Insight comes always after learning to tell which sign indicates what. I am telling you nevertheless this. What do you mean when you argue fervor is not applicable? I ask such question to declare again serenity affords nobody who attempts to escape from resolute storm to succumb to absence of enthusiasm. There is self-command justified beyond the imagination of the passion controller. The presentation of the second scenario, which I move to now, similar to the first although very concise, conveys a departure from impassionate abstaining to acknowledging the thunder, which is the excitement that is coming before someone's pleasure gets fulfilled. What virtue did I gain refusing to prioritize my appetite? The ready-for-care discussant asked his friend. None. My convoluted expectation to transition to a state of self-command a priori was suddenly interrupted by the individual discovery that passion forbids nothing. Such parenting recognition is a, so to speak, kinesthetic experience, producing a state in which you solely rely on the response of your body. Will this happen to me too, even though I have not cared for my heart reacting condescendingly? Further questioning his companion's defeating manner, the expert replied gently, Can you, in the everyday absence of joy, identify the self-contradiction, whereas a pleasure collapses the assumption that belonging to your physical constitution lowers your esteem? Bygone, he emphatically said, are the days that your crave, typically minimized by self-blame, is associating procuring happenstance to anybody who loses touch with themselves. I see the personal gain of abstinence removed from my vocabulary. The content of this episode, juxtaposed with that of the following, comprises the seasonal transition to the affiliation of a trainee with an impartial position that has started to take shape once they complete their adjustment to parenting every desire. I plea any self-caring, compassionate person to consider that neither pardoning fervor is sufficient measurement to treat excess arousal, nor is removing appraisal of comfort from their personal attendants a reasonable consideration. To undo resistance of accepting any type of ego celebration, an entire episode of Parenting Desire has declared that being in denial of one's appetite is the opposite of self-help. In this episode, said to prepare leveling up your practice, I mean to direct your attention to a single restorative premise upon which you may commence establishing your composure. Praising your ego does not affect serenity prose at all. Only you are responsible for your symptomatic infatuation. Sympathy is the ability to travel the distance between admitting and realizing an epithet pronouncing magnificence. Affiliating the intangible and invisible before commending sense-making in so much as it prolongs impassionate attitude constrains learning. That is why it is of essence to stop forcing oneself. My common sense favoring approach thus dismisses exaggerated reverence. Following blindfolded towards a non-tangible commitment sits far outside the prospect which defined I believe as I feel. The easiest, selfish, and confident way to see directly past the preposterous behavior when it appears in front of your face is to, notwithstanding the audience, claim a side that abides by empirical fealty. The symptoms I just listed in my presentation of the abiding to theoretical tranquility individual contravene a person from choosing a standing. Therefore, what prompts those servitude and abandonment of ego correspondence of mine is systemic satisfaction constraint. I argued that by tailoring a response to fit another person's delegated testimony, the protagonist selected a provision rather than an attestation. Many sides to choose from, including abiding by theoretical comfort, have had a storming disorientation symptom. Parenting desire is the process to alleviate anyone who is willing to undo crave battling under which they have been torn. There is no calling on my behalf of procedural comforting happening mysteriously. To the best of self-oriented trainees, walking the methodological steps is metaphorically similar to extolling a sense of direction. There exists nothing patronizing, feeling conflated among advancing states of care. Resorting to etymology, you may have noticed, does relate to my approach. My title, Parenting Desire, blends attending to a passion whereas having responsible protection. Training, by that metaphor, captures the tone which Episode 1 detailed. Of the terms used widely in this context, specifically readiness or sinister, which are discussed in Episode 2, are characteristic to that effect of realizing a synonym through repetition. The next episode coins atomic that blends power with impartiality. By looming together the invariable pieces of strength-building techniques outlined in advance, Episode 3 adapts to storytelling to repeat their execution. The first 3 episodes of Parenting Desire showed in one sentence that behaving according to evidence collected in search for endurance, as opposed to norms which are set by others, pleases collectors in demand for assurance. Therefore, whoever trains along grows enamored of themselves. A false credit presently assigned to those who endorse escapism from passionate experience has contributed to the abstinence mentality of certain individuals trying to find such assurance. In either exaggerating their serenity claims or pretending that by ignoring their craves they're seeking self-help, personality deniers dismiss seeing a rigorous response to ego-affiliate summons. I have added this episode to my series in order to shatter the contemporary conspiracy according to which it is imperative to affiliate a course of non-physical commitment to progress with self-learning. The lessons, which anyone affords to themselves through practicing the passion-centered methodology, have begun with sidelining a priori considerations about satisfying personal commitment. Pardon-based literature, an entire collection of prose that does not respect desire's significance as far as personal care is concerned, this courage-building approach does not resonate with. 7 stability exercises have been promoted throughout the book, Jesus Does Yoga and Autobiography, to continuously prove my claim as courage is concerned. For passionate life to occur, you first dedicate deliberation to doing what you want. Then you learn to distinguish between those passions that serve you, by contrast the rest, which do not. To level up as a trainee of such method, you have to reach a turning point which was shown by the discussion between an advocate of crave indulgence and a skeptic bystander. The 2 dialogues comparatively demonstrated the symptoms of not serving yourself first. In closing this episode, my plea for you is as follows. Being impassionate over time makes you lose strength physically, but also in terms of not being able to reasonably juxtapose those who decide escaping an experience with everyone else. The meaning of servitude, this podcast concludes, does not relate at all with caliber. A trainee of this methodology does appreciate courage firsthand, a process benefiting them by all means. Servitude, to whoever presupposes being self-affirmed, cautions this episode. As seen by impractical theorists, no crave whatsoever is approvingly associated with an approach to make you stronger. It is the desires of others they consider their servitude, which I justified a paradox. By the time your custom perception of being in the body stands for neither a downfall nor a distraction, anything that happens around someone who extols the idea of affiliating a purpose beyond physical understanding can become a reason to tolerate a prose that is unfamiliar. I am heretofore, as a synonym of tolerance, pronouncing the term ease to show you tranquility does not equal minimizing a length which mirrors that view you no longer have. Training, however, does save you a lot of agony which impersonating fealty brings, either in the form of renouncing someone's body or in the pardoning of committing to a purpose of physical attendance. Caring for oneself takes time and valor. By attending the next episode, you can see that I'm talking about bravery not in the sense of finding sporadic reaction to moments where desire seemingly confines, but in the sense of approaching a confinement with the purpose of stewarding an experience of pleasure. In designing this series, presented as an experiential method to undo desire rivaling, the concept of effort means not some physically arduous enterprise. However, it does connote copious exploration of someone's esteem, the so-called self-care. Caring stands for prioritizing personal excitement along with finding out which enthusiasm promotes realizing a goal, the impacts of which are reassuring. My approach, upon which 7 episodes were created, in one sentence states this: the infatuation experienced by a person has its origins to unattended passions which demand prioritizing. For that reason, I declared not a celibate, fervor-lacking attitude, but a proper mindset upon self-jurisdiction, which I call provocatively selfish in juxtaposing being affirmative as opposed to indecisive. To the one who acknowledges first an attitude of desire rivaling, this episode offered one reason to discontinue negating anything alluring to them. Minimizing your crave is what prompts confusion, the advent of which makes everybody to live apart from pleasure. So, as summary, I will tell you it is not their commitment to maintain an impervious to passion personality, but their ability to regard timing as if it were a dress that makes individuals ready for achieving a state of serenity. Wearing it inasmuch as it concedes loyalty to a personal care versus interrupting its fashion before featuring your embarrassment. Next for my podcast audience is an episode which concludes the objective of setting up your patience for what follows after you see past those who say caring for anybody has neither a physical nor a crave-hunting component. The task at hand, after sympathizing with excitement, is to surpass finally someone's anger when they await to receive something which for a long time does not present proof of happening. Therefore, committing oneself firmly to the practice which undoes desire rivaling invites from my correspondence a constant distinction between proof received upon whichever self-praise application contained in my methodology and the necessary patience to feel self-affirmed. Here is my reasoning for why control of personal appetite makes finding your recollection of joy precarious. Tranquility is found where confrontation about timing rests outside of your practical self-assessment. Episode 5 addresses the seasonal question pertaining to the time frame that elapses between selflessly denying your craves at the minimal and acknowledging the benefits of a passion realizing your self-esteem. The topic fits my self-care methodology in the sense that conducting the 7 techniques of my book positions your measurement of enjoyment beyond the sentiments of anybody else into individual verification reminiscent of times praised. My correspondents shall appreciate the passing of time not for that which an impatient describes in terms of compromise. Rather, they will give away whichever sorrow they suffer from the moment reality provides them with evidence to believe in sympathy for praising oneself. Fervor is a combination of a lesson in intolerance of injustice and another one in satisfying desire. The trainee forgets compromise and remembers exuberance. Until then, I respect not just the ones who praise their desires, but also the ones who do not.